Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Citizen Voice. We thank you for joining us. I know that everybody has a busy schedule, but it's a half an hour program. So if you can squeeze it in, my hat is off to you, although I'm not wearing a hat today. But if I had one, I'd tip my hat to those people who can take some time to become educated. The thing today is that I'm not going to be teaching history except as a linkage to something that's going on, because we have a special guest with us today, Stephanie Mann, who has created a program that is probably a program that is unique in the sense of what she is doing to help save our kids. And the program today, we're going to focus in a little bit on children and young people, because the overall situation is that we know that the 1619 Project is being taught in the school system. So we're going to focus on the children that they're teaching these things to. And then Stephanie Mann is going to talk about what she is doing and what she has been doing in the past and also currently to help our children. And if you think about it carefully, you know, kids really didn't matter so much back in the olden times. If you were a child or a woman, you were told that, you know, it's better to be seen and not heard. They didn't want you to open your mouth. And the kids and oftentimes women were really not treated properly in the family even, and in the society more especially. So the thing is that history, if you study history, you don't really get that sense of where kids are in the course of history. And I know we're studying Jamestown now, but there's a story of a young person. He kind of kept getting into trouble at different times, but he found a gun on the Mayflower, and he was playing around with this loaded gun and almost set the Mayflower on fire. So you don't hear about, you know, that story when we study the Pilgrim experience. But at another point in time, he got lost. He started wandering off into the woods away from the Plymouth colony. And ultimately what happened is that the people got freaked out, all the parents and, you know, all the people there. It was a terrible time. Many people were dying of disease or even starvation to some extent. But the kid wanders off into the woods, and everybody is like totally afraid of what might happen to him because he's wandered off into the woods where the Indians are. And the ultimate situation is the Indians found the child, knew that the child was obviously from the colony, and brought him back. Yet that fear of what might happen to him was a very real fear. And they mounted a search party, and you can imagine, you know, today in our society, what happens when kids disappear from their homes. And we have that reality in our society today. But we want to kind of go back to the Jamestown experience. And although I don't have many pictures of the kids in Jamestown, because I guess it was before they invented photography, we do have some kids in pictures who have visited Jamestown. This is a picture of a couple young ladies with, I presume, their mom on the ship. And this is a replica that is in the harbor there in Jamestown today. And so you have to think about this. Kids came across the ocean to Jamestown, but not initially. The reality is that the first people that came across the ocean to Jamestown were the men who were part of the effort that was the Virginia Company. And this was essentially a money-making venture. So they were venture capitalists sending people out into this new world. So kids came later, after the foundation was laid. And one of the things that I did mention before in one of the previous programs was that John Rolfe, who eventually ended up marrying Pocahontas, he was married before, and he brought his wife and child across the ocean. But the ship that they were coming on, that got caught in a storm, the captain of the ship saved it, salvaged it, but the people got stuck down in the Caribbean, and his wife and child died in the Caribbean. So the story of children oftentimes isn't really heard. The closest that I have is this picture of a child getting dressed by his mom in some colonial clothes of Jamestown in probably the 1600s, possibly later. I didn't really get the date of that period. But today's kids, when they go into Jamestown, they get an experience of, trying on some different things that they can put on. There's a kid here where he's got a helmet and, some kind of, body armor, which is probably made out of plastic. But the thing is that Jamestown is really kid friendly. I don't know if anybody has been there. If they've been there with their kids, they know how kid friendly it can be. They try to give kids a great educational experience. And there's a couple of other kids with helmets and the breastplate thing on. There's another couple, three young men there, stalwart young men with ready to go with their helmets and their breastplates on. So the overall situation is that in Jamestown, probably it would have been different. When kids went there, oftentimes they would be put to work by their parents. If you understand the story of Abraham Lincoln, one of the problems that Lincoln had with his father is that when Lincoln would be sent out to work on a farm or, putting up a fence or, whatever, any wages that he made, he turned over to his father. That was the law in those days. It was also the law that women had to turn over any wages or anything that they earned from sewing or whatever to their husbands. So different world. And as I said earlier in one of the other programs, we look through our 21st century lenses. We see these things in history, and then we bring our own dimension of understanding into what happened without really understanding or putting ourselves in the places of the people. There's a young girl here inside of an Indian house. This is what the inside of an Indian house would look like back at the time of Jamestown. So they let kids, I don't know if they do now since COVID, but they used to let kids go into these different places. Here's another one with one of the docents that is there who's dressed up like an Indian. This is a couple of kids, and they got a chance to interact with the docents there. They still have the docents, although it is a little bit more concerning if you're in the realm of the COVID disease time. The other picture that I have here is of a lady who is a docent who is tattooed or marked like an Indian to some degree. The essence here is that one of the big problems was that you didn't see this easy friendship between the European colonists when they came over and the natives. One of the first stories of the natives experiencing not the pilgrims, but the pioneers when they came into the Jamestown area was they didn't want to even be around them. So they basically disappeared into the woods. But this was their domain. And we showed you different, places where they lived before. But one of the first experiences was that the Indians attacked the colonists as they were exploring in the areas. So this gentleman with a gun here, this is one of the things that was the issue. A day in which they needed the guns for protection, not going there to kill in a real way to totally dominate that area. The essence was that they were going there to bring their families, they were going there to colonize, they were going there to raise crops, essentially to move into this new area. Now, there's a lot of nefarious things that happened there along the way. But our guest today wrote a book, and that book was called Alternative to Fear. So in reality, fear has been with us for quite a long time here on the North American continent. Now, obviously, Jamestown was not the United States of America. But I'm going to show you a headline to another another time, not in the time in which this guy carried the rifle or the flintlock or whatever that was, but this is a headline from basically 2019. Jamestown police warn parents that, you know, the children also, that there's a suspicious man. Now, not the guy with the gun, but there was a guy hanging around. If you read the article, he was hanging around the Jamestown area looking for tourists, looking for kids going to school or whatever, for whatever reason. But this is a concern in our society today. These people who watch children, kind of strange in one sense, but we do live in a day and age in which slavery still exists. And young people, especially girls, are taken as slaves in our modern day society, if we think about it. So we talked about slavery back at the time of Jamestown, and that became an issue. But I want you to understand that this reality still exists. And so we live in a time of fear. I want to call attention again to that book, Alternative to Fear, because this is a book that was written by Stephanie Mann. I believe she was helped with that book, but it was a time not long ago in which she found herself in a community here in California, in Orinda, California, without police protection. And so you have almost a parallel in one sense. There was not a lot of protection. The Army didn't exist in Jamestown at that point in time until later on, when troops were sent, because the king wasn't really concerned about what the Virginia Company was doing until much later, until they actually made a cash crop called tobacco, a profitable crop, and then the king intervenes. But you're talking about a community without protection. Even though you have somebody like Captain John Smith and some of the other men who were, capable in that time frame, Jamestown was pretty much at the mercy of a different environment, a very toxic environment. There was a point in time when John Smith went on an expedition to explore the area up the river, and 100 Indians attacked the Jamestown colony. So initially, you're talking about a situation in which the people who are in a particular community, they have to deal with this fear of being attacked, fear of being kidnapped, perhaps, fear of losing their lives. And Stephanie Mann wrote this book because she lived in a community where she sensed that there was a lot of people who were under the thumb of fear. I'd like to invite Stephanie to help us understand the background of why she wrote this book. I'd like to welcome Stephanie Mann, who's the author of a number of books. She's the founder of Save Our Kids, or Save Kids Now website, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But Stephanie, please help us understand the background in which you put this book together and what happened after that period of time.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for allowing me to share some information about a situation in my community that we had, which was a crime wave. And that's not uncommon today. We've got plenty of crime and a lot of fear. And I'm glad you related it to the past, because, as you know, this has been going on for a long time, fear of crime. And as you said, in my community of 16,500 people, which is a lot of people, probably bigger than a colony, but we didn't have any local police. We only had 1.5 sheriffs from the sheriff's department in our county, which meant that there was very little going on in the way of anything to stop criminal behavior. So we had to take a look at what we were going to do in order to stop crime in our neighborhoods. 10 of us got together, and we discussed it, and we decided what we would do was hire 2 detectives from the county and then they would work with us. We took control of the situation, and we put a plan together called the Neighborhood Responsibility Plan.
Now
And
that was out of your own pocket that you paid these detectives.
no, we did tax ourselves um, uh, a certain amount of money in order to get these two detectives to come and work with us. It wasn't going to be like police patrolling the streets. These were men that actually investigated. When we found something, we talked to them, told them what we found. They were there when we had some meetings to get us started, because you need some authority figures at first to get your whole motor going as far as engaging the public. So these two detectives came on board, and we put on neighborhood meetings. We put on big community meetings to start, to get the community, and we got the news media for our little newspaper on board to help us alert the community that we were taking steps to stop the crime wave. Well, to make a long story short, with neighborhood meetings and getting people together and getting them connected in the neighborhood, and without a police department, we reduced our own crime rate 48% within 2.5 years. Well, that was quite an accomplishment. Anytime that's an accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And what we had done was get people connected and saying, we are not tolerating this anymore. We're looking out for our neighbors. We're taking responsibility for the neighborhood. Each neighborhood where we had meetings, people actually got involved and kept an eye out for each other, called each other, contacted us, the people that were working with the Neighborhood Responsibility Program. And as I said, we reduced crime 48%. So we found out that half of our own crime rate were our own children, which was shocking to us. We thought at the time that these were people from the outside coming in to burglarize homes and steal things and create chaos. But it wasn't. Most of it were our own children. So we put on a program down at the high school to let them know that people are going to be alert to this whole thing. So we got the whole community engaged. Now, fear was greatly reduced because people felt like they were back in charge of their own community safety. And that was a big part of our solution.
It seems like you were trying to develop a community spirit and a camaraderie to reveal what was actually happening, to educate them, and then to organize them and to activate them. I think that might be one of the simplest ways to put it, I think.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we were doing. And one of the things that stresses me out a lot about today is just defunding police without any backup plan, without any responsibility on the part of the citizens to take charge of what's going on, no camaraderie, no connections going on here. I think that is a way to have a huge chaotic problem in our cities. And that's what you see and what you saw last summer. Who's going to stop these young people from committing these crimes if nobody is in touch with each other? Nobody's, they're just trying to take money away from the police. I mean, we got a huge problem here.
In actuality, I believe that we now need alternative to Fear Volume 2 or version 2.0 because it is a great deal of fear. And one of the things that I was impressed with, I've been to your website, I've looked at a lot of different things that you put together, and that website is safekidsnow.com. It's a powerful site where you have a lot of videos, a lot of resources, you have a lot of information there to help communities. And I don't think, from what I understand, that you're trying to be the one to do it all and organize it all. You're really trying to empower people to basically take responsibility for their areas. And I think at this point in time, much more so than back in the 70s, it is more needed at this point. And I think that this is one of the reasons I was inspired to interview you, because I feel that you did it and you are continuing to do it. One of the things that I was impressed with in an interview, you were talking about the power of one. And I've seen a number of different interviews that you had there on the website. And, you know, different people like Jeffrey Walker, Logie James, who was a minister there in San Francisco that you worked with, Butch Sosa in Oakland, who turned his life around. I saw these people. I saw, you know, the interview with Paula Pringle and Raquel Smith.
Wow, you did a lot of homework.
I did. I do my homework. I'm a teacher. So if my kids don't do their homework, how can I not? How can I expect me to not do it? So the thing is that I wanted to ask you, based on that concept, the power of one, you probably met many people who maybe they felt it was a heavy duty task and they felt maybe overwhelmed, but somehow, some way, they stood up. And do you have a story that stands out, maybe, or a couple stories that you'd like to share about that kind of situation?
Absolutely. I was a coordinator for our county, Contra Costa County in California. And we had a lady come into our office, and she was irate because in San Pablo, California, they were going to put a fence all the way around Davis Park because they had so many drug dealers in the park and they didn't have the police task force or anything, enough police to cover and take care of that problem in the park. So she came in and, as she stated, this is craziness to just fence off a park. We need to have a park for our kids to have a safe place to play. So we talked to her at some length and persuaded her to talk to her own neighbors and say, get those neighbors involved and go out and, you know, water their yard in front, or walk up and down in the park, or play cards in the park, walk the dog, and take down descriptions, time of day, descriptions of the suspicious activities, the people that were coming into the neighborhood that didn't look right, take down license numbers. And then they gave that information to us, and we turned it over to the police. And it took about 3.5 months, and the park was cleaned up, and there were no more drug dealers in the park. They literally got rid of the drug dealers. And so the neighbors were so excited about their accomplishment that they went back to city council and they said, the money you were going to use for that, for the fence and for the, to fence off the whole park, we want that money for swing sets for the kids and tables for the children. And their request was granted. So that was a community that empowered themselves. They felt like they had made a huge contribution to the community. They got some press, and they also got rewarded with having new swing sets and tables for the park.
Amazing. That's an incredible turnaround. Incredible.
Absolutely. Story. And it's people that are going to change things. It's not going to be ignoring the problems.
Yeah. When I was younger, I volunteered to work with a program out of New York City. And I went into the inner city in Harlem, and I was working with people in the community there in the neighborhood programs that they had. And in those cases, the neighborhoods are their big, tall buildings, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a housing situation. But one of the things that I learned from the woman, very powerful woman in charge, she said, the ideas of, the politicians helping is ridiculous, because what happens is that everybody has a handout somewhere along the line. The politician who gets the money has to share it with some other people who have their handout. And by the time that money gets to me, I have very little money to actually do anything. This involvement of people is so sad. Would you say that's kind of what your experience is Debbie, talk to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you don't have any skin in the game, what is your reason for making changes? Because you can continue the problem. Maybe you don't want to really solve the problem. I've seen that happen over and over again. Programs get funding over and over and over again, and they're not really making much change that help the community. Yes, they help some children, or maybe they help some families. But if you want major change, you got to get the community involved.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've seen some of that major change. We only have a few minutes here, but I wanted to direct people to the website. If you could put that that link to her site up there again, it's I believe it's www.safekidsnow. But that has an incredible wealth of information, and I think you're the kind of person that would like other people to just use that information and run with it. You are now called, or you qualify as a crime and violence specialist, and I'm sure you would be available to come and talk and give counseling where anybody would be interested. But this site, they can use that site without your involvement as well.
That's correct? Right. They can also, I don't know if you can see this, but we have all kinds of materials. This is called My First Steps to a Safe Neighborhood. It's very thin, very inexpensive, and you can get a bunch of these and to pass them out to neighbors and have a get-together, and people that are interested can start changing the neighborhood and making it safe. We also have this guidebook. If you're want more comprehensive approach, the Adopt a Block guidebook. And the Adopt a Block guidebook, what to do, what not to do, why not, don't get discouraged because this happens, or here's how you do it. Ask 3 questions when you go door to door. For example, what is the biggest concern in your neighborhood? Will you help? And people that say, I will help, then get them together and put a plan together. This is not rocket science. This is what people used to do in the olden days. They just got together and figured out what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And believe me, you come up with solutions that I wouldn't even think of. I learned more from our citizens than I ever learned from police or the officials or programs. I mean, those are all good things, but people are so innovative and so creative. They come up with their own ideas of what they want to do in their own neighborhood.
I think one of the key things here that I picked up from the experience, talking with you before and also going onto your website, is that you are encouraging people to take ownership of their community. And right. Whether it's a community, a greater community around the neighborhood or the neighborhood itself, I think it's very important for people to begin to feel that again and not feel like they're isolated or they're alone. I think COVID did a lot to cause people a great fear. And it's overcoming that fear, I think. I think you see it as a spiritual battle as well.
I do indeed. Good versus evil.
I think we're going to have you come back, because you can see that a half an hour is not a lot of time. But if you would like to come back, we would definitely want you to come back and share more. I think we could talk more in depth about some of the things that you have done in the past, and also some planning that we can do for neighborhoods in the future.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to, Dennis.
All right. Very good. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. You know that a half an hour is not a whole lot because it's evaporated. The essence here is that we wanted to get a little bit of an understanding. I wanted to help Stephanie Mann promote what she is doing, because I really believe in what she's doing. I believe that we need to take back our communities, and it's really critical, especially in this time. So thank you very much,
Dennis,
everyone. Yes, ma'am.
I just might mention that we have 350,000 churches in America. If each church would just reach out around the church and love thy neighbor by helping them connect, we could make a huge difference in a relatively short period of time.
I think that's a good idea, and I'm going to invite you back to talk about that on a more full manner. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for being here. And
Well,
thank
thank
everybody
you.
for coming in. Take care, everybody. Stephanie, if you could stay on.